My name is Lulanga Sydney. I'm the tutor for organizational behavior. Now, as we begin this presentation, let's look at the outcomes, the learning outcomes, the competencies that you're expected to attain at the end of this course. So at the end of this course, you should be able to demonstrate the development of classical management school of thought. You should be able to employ the concept of behavioral approach to management. You should be able to recognize the value of behavioral science in understanding organizational behavior. And you should be able to evaluate and identify developments in organizational behavior and management thinking. So organizational behavior, we need to understand it as we begin our presentation. So what is organizational behavior? It is a field of study that investigates the impact of individuals, groups, and structure on behavior in the organization for the purpose of applying such knowledge towards improving organizational effectiveness. It's also a system of study of the behavior and attitudes of both individuals and groups within the organization itself. Organizational behavior concerns itself with the scientific study or the behavioral processes which occur in the workplaces. So organizational behavior focuses on understanding and explaining individual and group behaviors within the organization. It also is concerned with what people do in the organization and how that behavior affects performance. Organizational behavior understands, predicts, and manages human behavior in organizations. Now, organizational behavior looks at both macro and micro. Micro is smaller within the organization. Macro is bigger. It could be overall organizations or organizations in different areas. It's on a larger scale. So the one with I is on a smaller scale, and the one with A is on the larger scale. So organizational behavior investigates the impact that individuals, groups, structures have on behavior within the organization. It focuses on improving productivity, reducing absenteeism, reducing turnover, and increasing employee job satisfaction and organizational commitment. Organizational behavior also uses systematic study to improve predictions of behavior of employees, groups within the organization. Now, on this last point that we looked at was to do with absenteeism and turnover. We need to realize or organizational behavior makes us to understand that absenteeism is not completely bad, nor is turnover. Absenteeism could be caused by a number of factors: illness, bereavement, inability to reach the workplace. Absenteeism needs to be entertained to a certain extent. So, and turnover also creates room for new blood. It creates room for innovation. It creates room for creativity. So when some people leave, you can't stop people from leaving the organization. But when people leave, there's a possibility of getting somebody equivalent or even somebody better. So what are some of the contributing disciplines to organizational behavior? There are a number of disciplines. One of them is psychology, the science that seeks to measure, explain, and sometimes change the behavior of humans and other animals or other beings. And then sociology, it studies people in relations to other human beings. Those are contributing disciplines. There's also social psychology. We looked at sociology. We are looking at social psychology, which focuses on the influence of people on one another. Another contributing discipline to organizational behavior is anthropology, which is the fourth one. Is the study of societies to learn about human beings and their activities. Then the last but not the least is the political science, which studies the behavior of individuals and groups within the political environment. So what's the importance of organizational behavior? There are a number of factors which make us to realize the importance of organizational behavior. So the first one is the practical application. Organizational behavior brings to reality certain aspects within the organization. It also enjoys and ensures personal growth of individuals within the organization, growth of groups, personal growth, both external and internal aspects of growth are entertained by organizational behavior. And also there's increased knowledge. The two types of knowledge, remember, there is what you call explicit knowledge and tacit knowledge that you need to realize what they are. Okay? Now, what are some of the challenges that organizations face in today's workplaces? There are a number of challenges that organizations today face in workplaces. The first one is the issue of quality and productivity. There's always a drive to improve quality, a drive to improve productivity. The challenge of improving people's skills or interpersonal skills. The challenge of managing human resources or diversity in the workplaces. The challenge of responding to globalization. There's also a challenge of empowering people, a challenge of stimulating innovativeness and change, and then the issue about coping with temporariness. People not being stable, people not the issue, the opposite of permanency. People are always in movement, they're always in transit. So, and then the issue about dealing with employees' loyalty. Then the next one is about improving the ethical behavior. Ethical behavior, ethical code, and code of ethics. Now, let's look at the number of areas that we consider when we are looking at organizational behavior. First, we'll look at the historical aspect. And the historical aspect, there are different studies that have been done to help us to understand organizational behavior, the behavior of people within the organization, individuals within organizations, and also groups. So the first one that we are going to look at is scientific management, which is pegged between the year 1900 and 1945. And this was propagated by Frederick W. Taylor. Okay, Frederick W. Taylor himself lived between the year he was born in the year 1856 and died in 1915. Now, Frederick Taylor aimed at making management a science based on well-recognized, well-defined or clearly defined and fixed principles. So his understanding was that there should be some determination of the standard of performance. People should be given the right tools, the necessary tools, the objectives should be set, the goals should be set, and therefore this determination of the standard of performance should be very clear. And then he also talked about functional foremanship. Functional foremanship, that people should be empowered, but people should know what decisions they can make, when they can make them, and then who makes what decisions in the organization. And then also the responsibilities of management. Frederick Taylor talks of management skills being given to employees, but he does not talk of everybody becoming a manager. And then he also talks about differentiation, piecework, system of wage payment. Frederick Taylor also talks about the mental revolution, changing the attitude of the employees in the workplace. So those are the basic components of scientific management. Now we look at Hawthorne studies, which were propagated by Elton Mayo, and they are pegged between the year 1924 and 1945. Elton Mayo wanted to know what could motivate employees in the workplace. So he carried out 4 major experiments. And those experiments are what you call Hawthorne experiments. They were carried out in different environments, different places, at different times, in order to establish what can make employees perform. So the first one was illumination studies, where you wanted to establish whether light or lack of light contributes to the performance of the employees. And then he also did the relay assembly test room studies, where the issue of specialization, the issue of people supporting each other, to establish whether that made people to be more productive. And then he also looked at the interviewing program, and then he also looked at the bank wiring room studies. Now, what were the conclusions of Elton Mayo on Hawthorne experiments? What he concluded was that an industrial organization is a social technical system. It's a social part. The social part is the human aspects that need to be taken care of in order to increase the employees' productivity, and the technical system is the physical aspects that also need to be improved. So he looked at those 2 areas. He said an industrial organization consists both of the social part and also the technical part. And then the second conclusion was that employee attitudes and morale are also important determinants of productivity. So the other conclusion that Hawthorne experiments made was that other factors, including workers' personality, employees' behavior, leadership style, they also affect the employees or the workers' performance, workers' attitude, the workers' morale. And then the other conclusion that was made from the studies is that the workers' social group has a prevailing effect on his or her attitude and productivity. So the social group or the other employees that the worker associates with in the organization. So what is the contribution of Hawthorne studies to organizational behavior? The contribution of Hawthorne studies to organizational behavior is this experiment or these experiments highlighted the importance of informal groups or informal groupings as key when it comes to organizational behavior. It also highlighted the importance of job satisfaction and the importance of the role of leadership and the style of leadership. It also highlighted the importance of employee attitude towards work. The other study that we will look at is what is called the contingency approach, which started in 1945 up to the present day. Now, contingency approach acknowledges the difficulty in offering simple general principles to explain or predict behavior in the organization. So contingency approach seeks to specify the conditions under which we can expect to find certain relationships. It also tries to represent a search for the factors that would aid in predicting or experimenting human behavior. So, contingence approach helps us to understand that the uniqueness of the employees, the different attitudes of the employees, the different understandings and different expectations in the workplace. There is also another study understanding of that has greatly influenced organizational behavior. It's what is called total quality movement, a culture that started in the 80s up to the present day. Talks about total quality movement, TQM. It talks about the corporate culture, which is based, and it bases itself on the 4 Ps. It looks at people, human resources. It also looks at the community or the family that the person comes from. It also looks at society. And then it also looks at partnerships, processes of work, and then it also looks at products and service products. Now, building quality into people. It's also key when it comes to organizational behavior. There is 2 essential parts. There is what you call the core values, CVs, and the core competencies, CC. There are a number of factors that we need to look at when we are looking at organizational behavior. We have looked at core values, core competencies. There is also what you call emotional competencies or emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence, we need to look at the history of emotional intelligence. Was initiated by Peter Sloven and Norton, and then the idea about emotional intelligence was propagated and still being propagated by Daniel Goleman. So emotional intelligence or emotional competencies, it involves a combination of competencies which allow a person to be aware of one's own emotions, to understand one's own emotions, to be in control of one's emotions, and then once that is done, the person can recognize and understand other people's emotions. It also helps one to make use of the understanding or the knowledge of emotional intelligence for the success of oneself and the success of other people. So emotional intelligence includes various types of personal skills, such as techniques for emphatic listening, dialogue, discussion. People who are masters of emotional intelligence tend not to possess emotional competencies or understand emotional competencies as a given thing, but something that needs to be worked on, something having certain challenges, and therefore they tend to think that critical issues tend to have tremendous impacts on building of interpersonal relationships. So as we come to the conclusion of this presentation, we have come to realize that organizational behavior is extremely complex. It includes many inputs and dimensions. It has 3 frameworks. It looks at the cognitive, the knowledge, understanding, information. It also looks at the behavioristic aspect, the behavior of people, both the proactive and the reactive, and then the social cognitive frameworks, which looks at relationships, understanding relationships, establishing relationships, maintaining relationships, analyzing relationships, and therefore Organizational behavior can be used to develop the workplace. It helps us to look at things differently. It helps us to understand individuals in the organization and also to understand groups and how to make these individuals and groups to realize the set goals, to realize the set organizational objectives.